Awesome. Right. Thanks for having us in here, Julio. My name is Byron,
Live
and
redet.
we got Patrick in here. We got Jonah, Kyle, Doris, and
Got
yourself,
best to
Julio.
share
Do you want to
because
give a quick intro about what we're doing?
Yeah. Well, I have an ecological background, and Byron comes from an ecological background, and he's now moved into food forests and agroforestry. And so, me and Byron had a good chat a couple of weeks ago, and just a couple yesterday, I think. Yeah. And we found that we have a lot of similar interests, and they're quite correlated things. And Byron has his own community related to food forestry and going down that route of growing your own food in a sustainable way and doing so with ecological restoration. So I thought it was a really good opportunity to cross over and we can share some ideas and have a chat and let Byron introduce what he does. And yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. No, thanks for the opportunity, Julio. It's been really exciting because, like you said, starting off with like a background in ecology and then going into this thing that didn't really exist when I was going to school called like food forest design, which now is, it's agroforestry is kind of the terminology that you use when talking about farm scale food production. It's been a really cool journey. And so I think that what I can do is, if it's anybody in here who has any questions at all about this, as I'm kind of walking through some of this, like raise a hand, pop it in the chat. Feel free to like unmute yourself, even just like full interrupt me and ask your question because I want to be here to answer those. But what I think would be the most interesting is I've actually got this basically just like a slideshow of photos that will document how, yeah, how this journey kind of unfolded to be where I'm like doing what I'm at today, basically. So what I'll do is I'll just screen share and you can see. Can you guys see that okay?
Yep.
Awesome. Just a thumbs up. Sweet. So this is basically I'll just flip through as much of this as is relevant. It's a slideshow I'm putting together for within my own community. But basically it's documenting how I became a food forest designer, right? So in the background, this is a photo of me, but in the background you can see this is a photo of my family land where in 2019 it started off just like a ton of grass, really like not being utilized that well, some unhealthy citrus trees. And now, just a few years later, oh, I clicked the wrong button. I'm figuring things out. There we go. Just a few years later, it's this diverse polyculture, right? Multiple, it's not a monoculture, but it's got multiple cultures, multiple species, um, lots of productive trees, lots of trees that are in the understory still growing. And so we'll get a chance to dive into what that looks like on the ecology side of things and the planting and what a food forest actually looks like in structure and form and in time, production, all that kind of stuff. But we also have the
Cool.
opportunity here, depending on what people are interested, to kind of look at the journey to get there. Because, like I said, I started off from like going to school for environmental science, right? Starts off as actually like a little kid. I went to this outdoor school where we were like planting trees all the time. This photo was taken in like 2008, probably. Just a wee lad, and
Did
a
you
big.
were you a skinhead then, or was that a new thing?
You can't say that, Julio. No, I started shaving my head like a year and a half ago, and it's been the most freeing thing. But really, like going to school and it was such a great opportunity to be always like the whole school was oriented. It was really small school oriented towards like just getting kids outside, getting them engaged with science and the natural world. And it was just a huge leg up in terms of like exposure to this kind of stuff. We were like always planting trees. We were clearing out like waterways of invasive species. We would be measuring all these like just all this like outdoor kid accessible science, which was a fantastic background to kind of like, satisfy that itch of like needing to be outside as a kid. But it also felt like it set me up really well to do something similar in university. So as I went through school, I just couldn't help but love being in the outdoors. You can see that photo in the bottom corner. I'm trying to be like I am today with the beard. I couldn't quite grow it yet. That's called old man's beard, is a lichen that grows in trees. But this is what my university experience also looked like. Doing environmental science, we were outdoors all the time. We are going on these road trips in these vans looking for, you know, this particular course that I've documented here. We were looking for reptiles and snakes and this professor in the bottom, his name is um we called him the lizard wizard because he was just like, we'd be driving down the desert like going a million miles an hour, and he would just like step on the brake, jump out on the side of the road, and like dive into a bush and come out with a snake. And it was just unreal. It was fantastic. But long story short, like this is my background, is like being outdoors, measuring the environment, whether it was like, you know, kayaking, taking water samples, or on the beaches, just collecting tide pool. Like it's just all these different ways of measuring the natural world. I felt myself so compelled by that. So that's why I, chose to do that in university, environmental science. Um, and policy was the other side of it. Right? Here's me like posing on the whiteboards. I used to love drawing on whiteboards, which if you've been to any of the lessons that I've done, whether it's in the food and forest family or the fellowship, you'll see this pattern is still the same. As I like to draw lessons and teach in that way. So I used to coach other students that I was with. We would learn together, we would study for tests, and I would kind of like lead study groups. So it was part of like environmental science, but then also part of it was like the the teaching and the sharing of that in university, which I love just as much as as the actual like outdoor based learning itself.
Cool.
So towards the end of that, I got a job with the National Park Service, which we had a really great discussion yesterday with Julio in the Food Forest Fellowship, all about fire as an ecological disturbance, how that's changed because the management of our landscapes has changed. And so, in short, the work that I was doing with the National Park Service was kind of measuring those ecological changes. And the funny thing is, on the very second day of my work there, like three massive fires like erupted at this national park, which was just another example of these fires. Like they happen, they're for real. It was pretty crazy actually. Part of our team, our field team, was stranded by one of these fires, and like their second day on the job, they had to get like escorted. Like had to start walking around the other side of the giant lake and get escorted by the fire department. It was pretty crazy.
Damn.
Yeah, and like I said, if there's any questions at any point of this, like just interrupt me because I'll just talk forever. But I'm gonna try and just work towards like how things are today, how they got to be that way. So if there's any questions, put them in the chat, raise a hand,
I
unmute.
actually didn't want to interrupt you then, but I am going to ask, like, do you know if there was any previous fire management talking about what we're talking about yesterday in your community, like in those parks before those fires happened, and then afterwards, was there a shift after this event?
Oh, there's definitely not shift. Like I don't think that the National Park Service is changing much management. The biggest shift in management came from moving from like indigenous fire management, which would have been like some kind of cultural burnings, um, low intensity, or every like 20, 30 years, the same square meter would have been burned, you know, to now like 200, 300 years on average, because the fire service just like doesn't want fires, right? The
Yeah,
National
right.
Park doesn't want fire. It's bad for business. And so you
Yeah,
suppress it, but inevitably it will come, and it'll be hot, big, and more destructive than it would have been historically. So just different management is resulting in a different ecology, which is kind of what we were measuring, right? These are what our field sites looked like. We'd be like off trail every single day, living out of tents, like just measuring trees. It was epic. It was pretty surreal. That was also a time when I was just getting like really into backpacking and just like really continuing to lean into that like outdoor based recreation, falling in love with the natural world, understanding ecology a bit deeper. Would love to go on these like, backpacking trips with friends in university. Like you leave class on Friday, you come back Monday just exhausted, but having the best weekend just exploring whatever local treasure there was nearby. Um, Also got into just other outdoor sports, snowboarding, rugby, mountain biking, just any way to like get engaged with the like I'm a very outdoor recreation person. Love having fun outside, especially in an area where Oregon in particular was like very outdoor recreation focused. So graduated university, it was beautiful. I really loved my time there. Ended up doing some research in New York, some ecology based research that actually had to do with like how children engage with ecology and how children learn and how they apply these like stewardship frameworks based on based on their exposure to the outdoor world. So like kind of always been involved in you know studying ecology, but also like the learning side of it, the applied side of it, the people side of it, which I really find fascinating. Ended up teaching at an outdoor school, kind of full circle to like the school that I went to. I taught at a similar one, which it just felt really beautiful to like get to pass on some of these experiences that were so formative and powerful for me personally. We teach kids how to make fires. They would like we organize like multi-day or sometimes a week-long backpacking trip where the kids would lead most of it. It was a really, really cool experience, kind of tough. Some of these kids, like, that it's tough conditions, right? Oh, we got someone in the chat who's not muted. Yeah, it's, we take them on all these trips outdoors, expose them to like the real world. Really good for kids. Not always easy, but yeah, we got some. Yeah, there we go. Part of what we were also doing is teaching them how to do research, and so it was really cool to like be in that place of university doing the research, but also getting to pass those skills and experiences onto kids, hopefully inspiring some of them to do some kind of similar outdoor ecology-based work in the future. You can see down here we're measuring. I don't remember what we were measuring that day, but point being, like, we're getting these kids out into the real world, and they just loved it. Hey, like that's just kids love being outside. They love that. That's where they belong. That's where humans belong.
I think it's formative for everyone and anyone to like spend time outside, and like long trips like where you're away from the structures of society really gives you that, like the longer you're out of that the society, the more it kind of pushes you in a certain direction. So that I did similar stuff and it was super enjoyable. Wow.
Yeah. So Oregon is a really beautiful, diverse place. You can see the land is like sideways in the ocean. But it was really just fantastic, getting the opportunity to do that and share those experiences with kids that I had when I was younger that kind of formed me into the person that I am today. It was just a beautiful thing. Also just a time in my life when I was like really just getting quite introspective about society. Like you said, Julia, I was like spending a lot of time like up in the mountains on my own reading books and like just like starting to feel quite like different than a lot of other people, like my peers. You know, putting less focus and emphasis on certain things that were becoming less attractive to me. Um, Ended up doing a like full left field kind of thing, but ended up doing door-to-door sales for solar energy or renewable wind energy, which was hilarious. Just for like a moment in time doing door-to-door sales, because I never would have pictured myself. I had like very little confidence in high school. To get into the point where I don't know if you can see on the whiteboard all these different metrics, and like this was a competition of like the highest performers in the whole region got flown to one city to do this stuff for a week, and I was like hitting all the records on this board, except for this one metric. All of them are my name. So it was this really interesting chapter where like doing something that was like kind of in alignment with what I cared about, like renewable energy, getting that into the world, but it was also like a door-to-door sales thing. So like some very interesting, like, time in your life, but still had a lot of fun doing that. And it was just like a fun skill to develop of like getting told no a lot. It develops
Mm.
yourself, in a sales way, but also just like a bit of a confidence thing. Ended up moving to New Zealand because my parents had moved there a few years before. They had moved there like 2 years before we kind of made the decision as a family to move to New Zealand, basically. And so I spent another 2 years in the States and then ended up moving out there with all my possessions and got a job with the local government doing environmental research, right? On this side over here, you can kind of see like a timeline that they'd put together of like coming in as like assistant, getting, a diploma, becoming an officer and a team leader. Basically, I was just outside every single day. My office was the outdoors. I spent like maybe 2 days in the office every month. Other than that, I was like fully on my own. We were in boats. We were you know, and like basically what we're doing is we're in charge of taking and collecting monitoring data, right? In the rivers, lakes, groundwater, um, estuaries. We were in charge of the hydrology for this whole region on the North Island. So it was a really fantastic way to get familiar with New Zealand. Somebody who had never really spent time doing my learning and research there. I went to school in the States, moved to New Zealand. It was a really great opportunity to kind of get acquainted with this country, with the new terrain, the ecology, the landscapes, just the culture. So I was a field researcher, a field technician, basically. So every single day on my own with the truck out collecting samples. Most of my time actually was spent like sitting on the side of a river, like troubleshooting this like equipment and technology, which got really frustrating. But again, you're in a beautiful place and you're getting paid to like be out measuring this data. So it was pretty cool. But yeah, a lot of time troubleshooting this technology. One of my favorite parts of it ended
Wow.
up being doing estuary research. So I would like walk around with this like little DIY grid thing at absurd times of day because it's all dependent on the tides. And so sometimes I'd have to leave my house at 4 a.m. Sometimes I'd be there way late, but basically you're searching for a low tide so you can measure sedimentation. So is an estuary gaining sediment or is it losing sediment just based on the land use higher up in the catchment? Super interesting. A lot of my days also looked like this, just like troubleshooting stuff that I had like very little idea about. you know, Electrical systems and being in paddocks all day, surrounded by cows, like trying to fix data loggers. It was, not always easy work, but it was always really cool. Really just an opportunity to be out in the middle of nowhere, New Zealand, places that nobody else really gets access to, collecting data. So it was a really awesome opportunity to kind of put a lot of my background to use, right? Studying ecology and really kind of like getting the dream job, so to speak. A lot of my friends in university messaged me afterwards. They were like, "Man, you're doing such cool stuff. Like, how'd you get to do that?" One big bonus was every month we would fly up in helicopters and get dropped off, in pretty remote parts of the region, collect samples, collect data, and then fly back. And so just some cool perks to it. But ultimately what ended up happening was it felt like I was a data monkey. It felt like I was just doing monkey work, and that like you could train a high schooler or you could train a monkey to do what I'm doing, because it was literally just like rinse and repeat the same thing over and over and over again. And it felt like really ultimately that I was just measuring the problem. Like we saw the problems, we knew what they were, but just nope, keep measuring the problems. And I felt myself frustrated that I couldn't do something that was a little bit more solution oriented. Um, Same time I was like motorcycling, got more into fitness and calisthenics, also got more into content creation. So that photo in the middle isn't me, but I started spending time around other people who are creating content because I was new to New Zealand. I didn't have any friends, right? I had no friend network. And so the way that I figured would be the best to make friends was start creating content around stuff that was interesting for me personally. Right. So the idea was it would just attract the right people to me. So I started creating content, spent time around other content creators, which is not something that I'd ever done before. I'd never really been exposed to content creators in my past. So they started inviting me on these trips and I started getting access to these like really cool opportunities that otherwise never would have had access to. And it kind of opened my eyes to the opportunities that come with creating content. So I just kind of continued doing that, documenting more of my journey and kind of landing in New Zealand and just starting to put a little bit more intention behind posting things online. Started documenting just like stuff that I was doing around. I would like pick up trash around my local community, and like make a video about that. This photo on the other side won a photo contest just like from my phone, but just like starting to engage a little bit more with the actual local community as well to kind of like build myself into that network. But again, New Zealand's an awesome place. Started like traveling a little bit more, documenting more of that, just kind of like sharing. Yeah, this is kind of still that first year of being in New Zealand, just sharing what I was getting up to. Fun adventures, being new to New Zealand, there's a lot of cool places to go see. Started training a little bit more regularly, doing some races, motorcycle. Just a fantastic landscape, whether it's for
Wow.
photography, for ecology, just some like really epic stuff. And, compared even to Oregon is fantastic, but New Zealand is just like a whole nother level. Started getting involved with local Marae, which is, Maori indigenous culture was really quite like important to me to learn about and expose myself to being new to a place. And so I did like an 8-week wananga where every weekend we'd go there, we'd stay, I'd learn about the culture. It was fantastic. And really cool opportunities that are coming up now as kind of a result of that. So I'll get to those. And then about a year into being in New Zealand, my parents and I bought this piece of land. It's basically just outside of the town that we were living in, and it was just really compelling because we were kind of excited to have a bit more space, and really my parents were just super interested in that stream. That it was just felt like this peaceful place, with that stream. And if you can see this drone photo, this is like an old orchard, right? An old kind of like neglected orchard. And so that wasn't a huge part of the reason we bought the land in the first place, but it provided that like really cool opportunity where I could just get really curious, because that's when I started being able to have a place. I also got a puppy, but it was a place for me to begin applying the ecology that I was, in my background really, because I cared so much about environmental restoration and ecology, but I didn't have a place to apply it because, the job was like science monkey, measure the data. Having a place where I could like start to, all right, cool, how do I apply ecological thinking and how do I apply these like regenerative practices? I had zero practical experience with any of that. I didn't come from like a food growing background, and I wasn't doing a lot of like planting things. I was just measuring problems for my whole career, basically. So this provided a cool opportunity. I started Googling like, how do you apply like ecological management to an orchard? I just didn't know anything, right? And you start Googling that enough and you land on permaculture, right? You start Googling that kind of stuff. So if you've heard of permaculture, I hadn't. So it was cool, new to me. I spent like a year. I signed immediately that same evening. I learned about it, signed up for this year-long course. I was doing it, driving every weekend up to this place to do this course and learn about what is permaculture. How do you do permaculture? How do you apply this stuff to your landscape? Um, so that started like this whole new direction. Instead of like going down the environmental science and monitoring side of it, it's split off. And this whole time, I'm still working for the local government. I'm still collecting the data, but I'm also putting together these like plans. I'm taking soil tests. I'm doing the things. I'm learning. I'm getting chickens. I'm starting to learn about pruning, pest and disease management. My dog Maya is growing. I'm just like getting enthusiastic about this side of it, and sharing that, as a result. Like I was already kind of in that mode of sharing content, and so it just kind of pivoted from like epic outdoor adventures, motorcycles, and it kind of pivoted to like, hey, here's what I'm doing on the land. Here's what I'm learning about in terms of land stewardship and fruit management. Um, Again, doing it. Got the chickens, had the ducks, moving them around, just having a really good time learning and being quite new to things. Ended up getting a couple of geese and some pigs as well. Like just like, experimenting, having fun, and like seeing what this is about, really doing my best to apply this stuff. This is my example of like what I call cute permaculture, of like companion planting. You'll see why I call it that later, but planting a lime with a, what is this, lavender, right? Diverse. That was the premise. Now I do this in a very different way, but this was kind of like that first step towards like doing things, trying to do things better, right? Finding awesome worms, mulching trees, the pigs, the chicken, like it, really trying to do this stuff, right? Some of these trees are well established. In some areas I was just planting, and so trying to figure out how to do that, but really just like applying the permaculture thing, right? Trying to do my best. Starting a little nursery, growing seeds, growing your own trees, making things more cost accessible, and just sharing, again, the whole process. This is my original nursery down here, like a few pallets stacked up with some plants. Looking back, it's like, it's cute. It's come a long way since then. Also started making friends with like other more practical people, like people who are doing like really awesome stuff with their land, learning from them, just getting hands-on practical experience from other folks in my community doing similar stuff. Towards the end of that permaculture course, ended up like nothing serious, but like helping to like teach little fragments of what I knew. This was one of the first things that I ever kind of like taught. It was literally just like, here's the layers of a food forest during an install that I was a part of as a volunteer day, right? So this wasn't me designing or leading anything. It was just like teaching a small group of people a little bit that I knew. Because again, you saw the photos from the whiteboard when I was in university. I love that stuff. I love sharing what I'm learning, not posing to be like an expert, but just sharing whatever I'm learning at that moment. So this is just basically a living site where I've developed like an old building into what is currently turning into my living space. Still getting engaged at the local marae, planting trees, showing kids the motorcycle, helping just do projects around there, staying involved. And at all that same time, still working for the, local government, still collecting samples, still doing field work, like being in really remote areas. It was, a lot of hard work, but it was super fun for the time that it was fun. It stayed fun for about 3 years. It got pretty repetitive and felt like a grind. Towards the end of that 3 years, I actually kind of created the opportunity for myself, because I was so into the video stuff at that point. I created the opportunity to make some video trainings for them. So I actually developed some like water quality sampling trainings for them to have a little bit of consistency when training new volunteers or new students for the summer. And so kind of like trying to incorporate both of my worlds on the land. Just like ended up getting really into this epic harvests and starting to bring more of that fruit into my workplace. And they started asking questions about, oh, how do you grow this, how do you grow that, because I started to become known as the person who was like growing these things and doing more of this side of stuff. And
Yeah.
once they started asking those questions of like, hey, how do you I started getting questions about like how to do things. And that was one of the indicators to me that like I can start doing some design work. And so this was my first voluntary design. I did this for free for a family friend. It was basically a redesign of their food for orchard and their duck pond setup. So kind of shifting some things around. You can see the installation we did as a big community effort. It was like 50 people there. It was absolutely epic. And this was the first food forest that I ever designed, right? Again, it was voluntary. I didn't get paid for this, but it was really great. Just as that first project to like get a little bit more comfortable doing this kind of work and leading an installation. So that's when I started my business. I was getting mentored by one of my favorite people who was in the space, Dan Palmer. Started my business, Backyard Paradise, doing food forest design and transformations for people. Um, then I learned about syntropic agroforestry. I don't know if anybody's heard of this, but this was like a huge level up. I learned from Klaus up in Northland of New Zealand, and this was just such a game changer, right? Went to an installation with them as well and learned about how syntropic agroforestry is so much more effective than traditional permaculture food forests. So I kind of felt bad for my buddy up here who got like the before I've made the big like learning curve, but we have since gone back and fixed all of those mistakes. So he's happy. But ended up coming home back to my land and applying it right away. Applied my first syntropic agroforestry line, which that was one of the big differences is like you're planting in big long lines instead of like patches all over the place. So you can see it kind of looks almost silly, like there's one little line right there in and amongst a bunch of other like what were truthfully like quite unhealthy and diseased trees, which now are no longer. But this is the premise: is you're planting really high density, high diversity, a huge assortment of different species with like short life cycles, right? Things that are harvested very quickly, medium, and very long life cycles. So there's things like macadamias planted in here with by seed every 2 meters. Not imagining that we're going to have macadamias growing every 2 meters in 10, 15 years, but you're giving yourself options. And part of that is like following these ecological processes, planting in the way that nature does. So you can see here, there's corn, there's beans, there's bananas, figs, there's all sorts of like edible trees, as well as support trees, right? Early succession pioneer species, which you guys are probably familiar with coming from like an ecological background, whether it's like just fast growing weedy trees, nitrogen fixers, eucalyptus are used quite often. So we can dive into that. Essentially, I saw the positive feedback of that first system though, and I just like went for it. I just kept installing these systems like nonstop. And ultimately, that first year resulted in some really cool findings of we get frost where I'm at. And a lot of these species are quite sensitive to frost. And so the first feedback that I saw that was of it working was it's repelling the frost. It's creating a microclimate and keeping the frost out, which was just phenomenal. So that like these photos are all the evidence that I needed after that. After that, like I think this was actually maybe the second year. Yeah, this was after the second year. All the feedback I needed to just fully lean into it and keep diving in. That was the following year. Things just like kept growing, kept popping off, kept kind of taking over more of the orchard, turning it into this diverse agroforestry system. This was around this time last year, maybe a little over a year ago. Um, Things are just like going crazy, right? I start creating like more dedicated YouTube content to this. Again, the teaching thing, this video up here is literally just a video of me sitting in front of a blackboard. It's 24 minutes long. If you want to go watch it, it's like the fundamentals of like, from a year ago almost of like everything I wish I knew when I first started about syntropic agroforestry. Starting to also document more of the actual like design and installation projects that I was doing. I've installed multiple food forests at schools now, so it's not just for private landowners, doing some organization level stuff, doing some farm level stuff. You can see this is a big gully that's like getting reforested. So lots of just like diverse opportunities in the food forest agroforestry space, depending on what you're interested in doing. Here's a another photo of that first site, my buddy's site, Billy. So his site's coming along quite nicely. Another site photo of it here. So it's developing really well after just a few years. And then just doing more design, right? This is a steep, really steep sloping backyard. This transformation in the bottom is like 2 months after planting it. I need to go back and get some update photos once I'm back. Just more projects, right?
Sorry,
Just
Byron, not to interrupt you, but
please.
how did you meet like the next people that you kind of helped with their own food forestry systems, like, or syntropic systems? Like you went from your neighbor, or sorry, your family friends, I think you said, went back and fixed it, worked on your own, and then the third one on the slope, is that another?
So this from here spans like 3 years of just like doing this work at my site and sharing like every single day, and also sharing of like client projects. And so there's been like there was a lot of projects in between what you're seeing here and the first one, because of just like constantly sharing. And it got to that point where I was able to quit my job, and I was just broke for a long time, and being okay with that, being okay with being broke because I was doing work that I really cared about. Right. I was being dumb. I didn't know anything about business. So I was charging myself at like $20 an hour, just like doing design and installation work, which, like, looking back, it's hilarious, but it allowed me to, like, I think I quit with like $300 in my bank account, but I was so committed to like making this work. And I grinded for it. Like, if it's all there too, you can scroll back and see, but I was just like relentlessly pursuing this thing with nothing else in mind. Right. So that's how this happened, is like word of mouth, Instagram. That's mostly it. Instagram, YouTube, and word of mouth.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would drive around the North Island, and I still kind of do this today, not so much because at the moment I'm traveling doing some research. But I drive around the North Island, and I just like do installations over a few days, over the week, over the weekend, whatever clients are wanting. And then figuring out how to actually like make a little bit of money doing this, or turn it into like a better business model. So that's been a fun learning. This is one of the projects that I'm currently working on. It's a small farm. I'm going to probably be here a little bit more long term than a lot of the other projects, which is kind of like a lot of the other projects are like, you walk in, you do it, you walk out, you come help and manage every now and then. I'll probably be turning this into more of a home base. So this is an exciting project on the horizon. But again, more projects, more transformations, and continuing to engage with schools and groups, right? I still love this. I love teaching with the blackboard, the whiteboard, getting groups involved. This is like such a key part of what I love doing, is just like spreading the enthusiasm for this, which is what I love about this Skool platform. Is I've got this community happening now with the Food Forest Fellowship. Kyle's part of it. You're in here. What's up, Kyle? Nice to see you. Ended up going to Brazil. Now, this was partly because Brazil is the birthplace of syntropic agroforestry. Since the 70s, Ernst Gotch has been like pioneering this stuff. But Brazil is where the cutting edge is happening. You really want to learn about syntropic ag, go to Brazil. There's a million sites. I spent 2 months there last year, partly to level myself up, and because I knew that was the place to be. Part of it also was to kind of address this feeling of like, I need to create more evidence that I am who I see myself as being, right? Because like, yeah, you can do all the food forest stuff in New Zealand. Yeah, you can like learn everything there is to learn in New Zealand's context, but there was so much depth that I was missing from not going to Brazil. So part of it was to just like reassure myself that like to have the qualification, to have experience. So went to Brazil, went to countless agroforestry sites, learned, worked, volunteered, documented, interviewed folks, and just like spent 2 months with no plan really. I knew 2 people when I went there as my like contact points, and then the whole trip just unfolded. This video is actually on YouTube. It's like 40 minutes long. It documents like all these different sites and adventures. Highly recommend watching it. I got back and I continued doing more design work. And once I got back to New Zealand, I asked this question on my story, and I asked who would be interested in, or considered being a food forest designer. And there's quite a bit of interest in that, especially because, my audience is people who are into this kind of thing. So I put this Food Forest Pioneers program together. It was a boot camp. It's a really intensive 6-week program, like how to design your own business. It was hosted here on Skool. And it was really successful, right? We did a really intensive 6-week boot camp. And part of that was also they get to come to like Costa Rica and Brazil to learn hands-on with me. So Costa Rica's already happened. Brazil is on the horizon. It's coming again for round 2. A lot of them, it wasn't just New Zealand folks. Some of them were in Australia, Taiwan, Malaysia. So folks who are like really learning and getting after it now, which is absolutely awesome to see. This is Chris. He's in Taiwan, really doing it. Some incredible community oriented work and installations. Fast forward to now, or closer to now, I went back, right? I gained so much value out of going to Brazil that I decided to come back. But first, Costa Rica, and then Florida. So this is me here in Costa Rica with one of my mentors for a long time, Scott Gallant. He's kind of been always like somebody that I've admired his work. He runs Porvenir Design in Costa Rica. It's a permaculture design firm. They do agroforestry. And he's just somebody who I've always admired, right? His design work, the business that he's set up, really fantastic. So it was a beautiful opportunity to finally get the opportunity to kind of like sit amongst these people that you admire and teach and work alongside them. It was this beautiful moment. You can see here, I was like dead asleep. I was like so sleep deprived. And this was just like a month and a half ago in Costa Rica. I was sleep deprived because on one hand, I was in the middle of this 2-week intensive program. On the other hand, I was also trying to like share and document. But at the same time, what I was trying to do is I was trying to launch this new thing with the pioneers. I was launching the Food Forest Fellowship, which is here on Skool. We've just launched this. It's a community. So that's what I was like pouring myself into while in Costa Rica. I was like trying to be present, trying to like do the Costa Rica permaculture design thing with Scott, but also trying to launch this Food Forest Fellowship. So it launched. It's fantastic. We've got an epic community happening in there. Mostly just like facilitating and helping with their projects at this point. Trying to make the education itself freely available. That's on our free platform, Food Forest Family. But just helping with site design, project design, helping people one-on-one, doing like basically small group consulting with people. So this is kind of where I'm at now. I've just left Costa Rica recently, seeing all these incredible projects. This is a syntropic vanilla agroforestry system. Currently in Florida, where they're doing coconuts and mangoes and papaya, all kinds of incredible things. And then I'll be going back to Brazil very soon. And then after that, back to my home in New Zealand. And so this is the journey. That's kind of how things have eventuated to become what they are now, what I've been doing. Would love to kind of like open things up for any questions or opportunity to discuss any component of that. Hopefully it was interesting. Hopefully you found it interesting, Julio, Kyle.
Yeah, I loved it. It's super interesting to see how you went from a ecological role into more of a, I guess like you would almost call it agricultural role, but like, that field in general. What I was going to ask you, like, do you let natural succession and natural, I guess, pioneering and the shifting of species happen within your food forest, like within your lines? You know how you were saying the macadamias, obviously they're quite long-lived species, and you put more seeds than you might need at the start so that, there's going to be success and failure. Do you allow it to very naturally occur, or you control an element?
Basically, we're really heavy in there. Management is everything in syntropic ag. The management is it determines the success or failure of a project, basically. And so if you say, do you control or allow a natural succession, as in like, are we actively in there managing? Absolutely. Because the whole point is we overplant. We plant more species than we need. We also plant really aggressive species. We plant eucalyptus. We plant these fast growing nitrogen fixers that oftentimes have these really bad reputations of being like these invasive trees. There's a lot of ecology research coming out more recently that's showing that these novel ecosystems actually have like a lot more biodiversity and resilience, right? When you have not exclusively just like native trees in an area. And so part of syntropic ag is using these exotic species. Part of them is using these like species that have bad reputations for the service they provide. Now, I see there's a comment in here. To someone who hasn't heard about syntropic agroforestry, how would you explain it in a few words or sentences and the difference to permaculture? Yeah, thanks for that question, Doris. Good prompt. Another way of thinking about syntropic agroforestry, the most simple way that I can explain it in as few words as possible, is successional agroforestry. Successional in terms of like you're utilizing these different stages of succession, right? So the early stage of succession, you have like fast growing annual and biennial plants. And so in syntropic ag, you're planting a system, and the first things to produce are those like fast growing vegetables. You're harvesting those, but then the next harvest right after that is going to be your slightly longer lived species. Maybe it's like longer lived vegetables, or maybe it's berries or fast producing fruits. And then you're harvesting those for a period of years. And then that just slowly, like, ecologically successions, right? The plant community moves forward into eventually your climax species. And the whole time you're doing these like management pulses, right? These heavy pruning interventions of those support trees. Because what you're doing is you're building the soil biology, you're building the life and the process. That's the biggest difference. So I'll zoom out again. Syntropic agroforestry is a process-driven agriculture, the process being ecological succession, versus like even classic permaculture is still in many ways very inputs based. You're importing compost, you're importing wood chips, you're importing a lot of these things, even if it's like grafted trees, versus in syntropic ag, you're planting things from seed and you're field grafting them. And so it's a very, very different approach than most conventional growing paradigms, or even non-conventional.
That's really, I actually have another question as well. Do you find that it's easy, do you rely on having natural water structures in place? Like, do you think that you require a creek through properties, or have you found ways that no?
No, there's absolutely no need for it. I don't irrigate with my stream. I wouldn't touch it, not because it's, you know, dirty water, but the water goes through like, you know, pine plantations, dairy farms, other horticulture. So you know, it's great to have the stream, but in terms of needing irrigation, absolutely not. Now, will it help a system? Sure, you know, obviously, but there's plenty of dry farming or no irrigation systems, and syntropic agroforestry is a great, yeah, it's a fantastic example of what can be done without irrigation.
Cool.
Timeline from the first pioneer species to trees. So that's a difficult question to answer, because different pioneer species can have different, like you can have a pioneer species like the I don't know if you're familiar with the castor oil.
Yep.
It can be like, it can be grown and chopped out of a system entirely within like a handful of months, and then it's fulfilled its function, fulfilled its role. But then maybe you have another support tree to come in after that one. So like your aim is to have a succession of edibles, but also a succession of support trees. So like the support tree that exists down here at this far succession is different than the early succession support tree. Building on Dora's question, other than growing tree lines, can you explain the difference between high density food forest and syntropic? A high density food forest is like more close to syntropic, versus like, you know, low density food forest is almost more like orchard or like mixed orchard. The key difference probably between what you just asked is like the use of, and the use of support trees and the active management. The active management is everything that differentiates syntropic from even like permaculture.
On that question as well, Byron, with the first pioneer species to trees that Doris asked, do you get crop return within like a year? Generally speaking, is like that's something that often happens.
Yeah, it depends entirely on the context of the system, right? If you're designing a system for like market garden production, you can do that. You can set up a system where like you're producing vegetables in like 30 days while your tree lines are establishing. So what you would do is like you'd set your tree lines like 5 or 6 meters apart.
Yeah.
You'd plant really dense tree lines of like tree species, support species, but in the middle you have vegetable rows that maybe can go through their own succession of like early succession vegetables, later succession vegetables.
Yep.
And then in Brazil, you see that happening a lot, where they transition the middle from vegetables into coffee, which is their target crop, and for most of these agroforestries in Brazil. Comment, you're awesome. Thank you very much. Oh, that's cool. Awesome. Love from South Africa. Thank you. What do you plant? What do you plant in the forest in lines? Maybe I missed that. Oh, why do you plant in lines? You plant in lines because management is everything, and you need management to be easy and fast and be able to be done efficiently. If you're planting things all over the place, higgledy-piggledy, you'll cut something with the brush cutter, or you'll cut something wrong with the machete, or even just organizing the organic material around certain areas that are like non-linear, very difficult. So that's why everything is done in line, so you can very quickly organize your biomass, the organic material. And kind of the opposite on the nest side of things. Just Luke asked about the nests. Nests are great for like right by the backyard, where you have a little bit more time, you want it to be a little bit more organic and flowing feeling. They're also really great for like big, huge, broad scale where machinery isn't available or equipment doesn't make sense, or the terrain is just like too tricky. For large scale, like zone 5 reforestation with like just nut trees and like other low maintenance kind of systems. I also like to use nests at schools because it just has that really nice like flowing feeling with kids, and they can like do nests in little groups and look after that particular nest ongoing. And so there's different contexts, but most of what you see in syntropic ag is straight lines just for efficient management.
Sorry, I'm gonna keep asking questions because I'm loaded and like I'm far from like I haven't dived myself into this stuff very much at all, but it's something that I'm really interested in. It's definitely something I see myself doing in the future. So I'm just gonna ask really basic questions. I hope no one minds, but
we're gonna run a new like succession of the Pioneer program, and you're totally gonna be in it because that's where you learn basically like all the fundamentals and then how to apply them on a farm site and do consulting with that.
yeah, that's sick. And that's like I think a super interesting and expanding industry. My question was more so around like when you have a dry system, like how do you integrate water into that system? And if like I think about like in Australia, we have zones that are quite arid at times, or maybe like less soil nutrients because they've been run down. Like that
Yep.
water then like comes heavy and then dissipates. And obviously it's case by case. But I'm wondering if there's like a few, like a tip, a thing that you do that you seem to be working on.
I'm so excited. I'm excited to answer this question. Thanks for asking that, Julio. So the pattern here, the pattern to what you're saying is that when we cut the trees down and we deforest the landscape, we disrupt the water cycle, the hydrology cycle.
Yeah.
Right. So the land almost becomes more en route to becoming a desert, right? That's the principle of desertification, right? The way you plant water is by planting trees. There's this really great organization and idea in Brazil called Agua se planta, right? You plant water, agua se planta. You plant the water. And so by planting trees, you plant water. By planting a forest, you plant water, because what happens is it rebuilds that water cycle just in the micro, right? But also in the macro. There's a really great, I went to Ernst's farm. See if I can pull up the drone image. I'll keep talking while I find it. But basically, the premise is you're planting water. Right, here it is. Agua se planta. By planting a forest, you plant water. By deforesting, you desertify. So this is some of the drone footage from Brazil last year. And I want to take you to this site in particular. Here. So this is Ernst's site, Ernst Gotch. He's kind of like the pioneer of syntropic agroforestry. All of this land, like hundreds of hectares, was deforested and degraded.
Wow.
In the 70s, he came in and started applying and practicing and learning how to apply syntropic agroforestry, doing commercial production. So this isn't even all of it. Like there's shots where it shows like the broad landscape. This dude understood ecology. He's a Swiss farmer. He came to Brazil. He understood ecology and started farming while restoring the landscape. And look at that. You're planting water. Right?
Yeah.
Look at evapotranspiration. So you're planting water by reforesting the land while also getting crops. And so that's why I care so much about this, is like it's not just like go reforest at cost. It's like reforest while producing food for your local community, while creating economy.
So is there a transition period between the like not desertification, but from that to having this system, which by the way, that's insane that he managed to do that. That looks like it's been there forever kind of thing.
Yeah. It fully depends on like what your goals are with the system, right? Are you trying to harvest radishes and lettuce and take them to a market, or are you trying to like focus on like later succession species? He was focusing on cacao, right? So he was doing like probably bananas, cacao, papaya, all these like fast growing species, but now have transitioned into like there's Brazil nuts all up in here. Like there's these massive trees, giant Brazil nuts. There's cacao, there's cupuaçu, there's acai, there's bananas, there's all these different higher succession species. And so part of it is just understanding your own context, because not like this is not everybody's context. The real question is how do you apply these frameworks and ideas to your own context? And so if anybody's interested in learning more about that, I do have a free like course on how to actually understand your context, how to apply these, like it's all the fundamentals. It's like a 3-hour thing. I just created it last week. Actually, it's taken hundreds of hours. It's a free training basically on all the things you need to know about this. So that's on our free platform on Food Forest Family. I don't know, Kyle, have you seen that yet? Kyle's in our paid group, the fellowship.
No, I haven't seen that yet. I'll definitely have to check it out.
You got to go check it out, man. It's fantastic. And anybody else who hasn't yet, Duncan might be from our group. I don't know. But definitely go check it out if you're interested in this at all. It's free.
Yeah.
It's a fully free source.
I just dropped the link in there. I enjoy it so far. I've really enjoyed it. I just put it on in the car and listen to you in the car, dude. It's good.
Nice. There's good diagrams in there, so don't just listen. There's
cool
diagram. I'm seeing another couple questions in here. How do you deal with pests? Oh, great answer, Luke. Concerned about some pioneer species. Acacia. I love acacia because they're very thorny. I don't like the thorny ones.
Yeah, there's lots of options there.
Yeah, if you can find a non-thorny variety, whatever eucalyptus great you have access to. Yeah, basically like part of this, and you guys are great at this, especially like organizing an ecology community, is one of the most powerful things you can do is learn to read your local landscape and have an understanding of the weedscape. The weedscape is like what non-native and like probably maybe like invasive weeds are in your area that are like doing a really good job at helping to advance succession, right? And I say do a really good job, like maybe they're seen as these weedy, bastardly trees, right? But in many ways, those can be the most powerful ones, and if used appropriately, can really accelerate a system.
I heard a really interesting story of talking about the thorny acacias of a guy out in the WA wheat belt, and he had a huge property where he ran cattle and quite, I think, a semi-arid kind of area. But he would, when the rain falls, it falls really hard, channels into one river and would flow out of his property within hours. So to change this, he filled his river as much as he could. And then where the cattle would create like their pathways, it would eventually create new rivers, right? And so what he started doing was using thorny acacias or plants that they didn't want to walk through. He would cut them down and place them strategically. And then he showed me a drone image and it looked like a tree of life where the water was flowing just all over the landscape. And he said it like changed from flowing out of his property within 2 hours to like a few days. And that brought so much life that the cattle could then feed on and in turn reset the cycle when they defecate and stuff like that. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, and we haven't even spoken at all about the opportunities that exist for silvopasture, which is combining trees, productive trees with cows, right? Because then you're getting the benefits of both, right? And so that's a really cutting edge exploration point for me, is like, and there's actually just like a lot of sites that I've visited recently, people I'm talking to, and demonstrations of like how to practically go about doing this. So it's such an exciting place to integrate, especially for New Zealand, where like dairy farming is like the main industry. Is like, how do we figure this out? How do we figure out how to restore the environment in a really practical way, planting more trees, getting more water infiltration, getting like more ecosystem services, and happier cows and happier land, and like, like it's how do we do this stuff where it's a win-win-win across the board?
Yeah.
Aaron, was it hard to convince your parents to allow me to convert the orchard? Yeah, kind of. It started out as like me just like being a little bit crazy and like, yeah, it's just like a line or two over in the corner. But it quickly accelerated into like, wow, you're taking over like the whole block 1, and then now I've planted like starting into block 2. And so it's a conversation thing, right? Like it's just being able to have conversations and understand like what their needs are, what my needs and desires are, and how do you come to those compromises, right? Like if it were all up to me, there'd be some things that like we're doing differently. And so hopefully like as I get more experienced, I'm able to continue taking on more and more of that responsibility of the management, which then opens it up for me to, manage things in the way that I want.
What I've done, not that I've gone that far with it, is I like to collect local plants. Just like when I'm walking down the street, there'll be a little juvenile, maybe a brachychiton or a plant, and I'll take it and put it in my garden. Completely zero strategy because I'm only just starting to learn this. But my agreement with my dad is that like I will fund the whole refurbishing of his garden, and I guarantee it will look better and be less maintenance for him. And that's like the deal we've struck. And like we're compromising. I agree. It's all about compromise.
Yeah. To answer Luke's follow-up question, yeah, it's still a productive orchard, right? We're still like selling crops of citrus and avocados and plums and apples and persimmons and pears, etc. So it is a commercial operation, which is why there's that balance of like this new thing plus what's already like working, right? And so that's why I've kind of been like keeping myself in many ways to like the younger, less established areas or the areas where there's more disease pressure, rather than going into like the block of 25-year-old citrus that's just like pumping, right? Like the priority really at the moment is like pioneering the empty available space. Maybe eventually in the next couple of years I'll run out of room and I'll need to start doing some interventions, but yeah, we're still maintaining the commercial viability of and the commercial production from the non-agroforestry side of the orchard, as well as within the agroforestry as it kind of like melds together.
It's super interesting.
I love it. You can see why I like fully like dropped a lot of the other like and I'll keep doing more of that, but like I just fully dropped so many other hobbies to just like pour myself and dedicate. Like I don't do anything else right now. Like my whole life is oriented around this thing. And I again, I love it. I'm here in Florida. I've been visiting some of the most epic sites, like the most cutting, like think of the most expert syntropic practitioners in Florida. I'm spending time visiting with them on their farms, learning with them. Same with Costa Rica. I'm going there. I'm like spending time with the most cutting edge, like expert practitioners in Costa Rica, learning from them, going to their sites, consulting with like alongside them. I'm trying to expose myself to the people who are like top doing this.
And broaden your own scope as well. I think me and Luke have the same question here, hopefully. I was going to ask like what you produce, it would be organic.
Yeah, so we're actually certified organic, which is annoying in some respects because the organic certification frameworks are not designed for syntropic agroforestry. And so, for example, they want like a source to be like of all your plant material, they want the source to be like verified and like all this stuff. And it's like, well, hey, I'm collecting seeds off the side of the road, man. So like, who wants to verify that, right? Who wants to declare that that's certified? Like I'm collecting seeds off the side of the road from these species and growing them, and I'm propagating all these things from other agroforestry sites. And so in many ways, like they kind of like what I'm doing from like an ecology point of view, but from the organic framework, truthfully it's like a bunch of old men who like aren't kind of like keeping up with what modern agriculture can become. And so hopefully at some stage in the next handful of years I'll get a seat on like some level of like authority on the board for that organic certification, and be able to kind of like introduce a little bit more of that. That would be fantastic. How'd you go about setting up these trips and meeting with other sites and leaders? Mostly just online. Is I would reach out to people or people who I've been following for a long time in Brazil. I would say, hey, I'm coming, can you connect me with anyone? And then they would just let me at their site. I would work with them, they'd connect me with other people. It's been super free flowing. Like I don't like logistics planning. I just like show up, we have a good time, and they pass me on to their friends. Still confused about soil prep, assuming it's a minimum dig till or you till a bit deep once. Yeah, it's basically like a one-time disturbance. Depends on soil type, kind of. Don't have access. I think a lot of those questions will be answered if you go watch the fundamentals, the free training that I put out. a lot of those questions will be answered. But basically, yes, long story short, it's a one-time heavy disturbance of like deep intervention. If you can, you'll get a subsoiler in with like basically like a deep hook, like almost a meter long into the soil, and like break up any like deep heavy compaction where your tree line will go if you have access to it. Helps the trees establish like super fast. And I mean, I didn't do that at any of my sites, and it's doing beautifully, but like going forward on certain sites, I will be doing that. But yeah, basically it's like a one-time chiropractic adjustment is how I like to think about it, is like crack the back, and then from there you're just like super healthy, regenerating, and there's no disturbance after that.
I'm just going to quickly interrupt because I do have to leave in 15 minutes. Sorry. But quickly, if there's any asked questions, maybe throw them in the chat, or feel free just to turn your mic off and ask Byron or myself. And I thought this would be a good opportunity. Byron, like, is there if like, for me, like, I want to get into this, like, what is the best way for me to do it? Should I join the family for free and then move through to the fellowship? What's your recommendation?
The best way, if you're serious about it, join the fellowship and sit in on as many calls as you can. We do about 4 live calls a week, maybe 5, where we're actually like, it's basically like group consulting at this stage, where you get to sit and watch like recommendations come in for sites, and you get to see like how that process looks. And if you have a site, you get to get guidance on your site. I also guide other people on like starting their own businesses, and that's kind of what the Pioneers group relaunch will be for. At the moment, kind of it's all happening in the fellowship, but once the Pioneers reopens, that's where you'll want to be. But for now, just like be in the fellowship, be on the calls, be absorbing as much of this as you can.
Yeah. Cool.
And same with anybody else who's interested in this, is like, if you really want to take your life into this direction, come hang out in the fellowship. It's like, it's $40 a month, and it's like so worth it. Luke's in there, depending on which Duncan this is. Duncan might be in there as well. It's the most value you'll get, because like, yeah, it's tremendous in there. Plus there's just like huge amounts of recordings from like past calls. It's, yeah, that's the place. There was a quick question about heavy disturbance to the entire land or just the tree lines. If you're just planting tree lines, just do that. If you're planting a block where you have tree lines and alley crops in between, you would be disturbing the whole site. So it depends on the aims of the system. Yeah. Thank you guys for listening, though. I really appreciate each of you showing up and giving, time is the most valuable thing you have. And so thank you for gifting that to us today. And again, if you're at all interested in this, come hang out in the fellowship. It's the place to be. We dive really deep on this stuff, like multiple times a week. We'd love to see you guys in there.
No, thanks very much for your time as well, dude. I appreciate. I watched the sunrise come up behind you, so you've championed it again. So, no, thanks everyone for joining us, and appreciate it, Byron. I have recorded this, so hopefully in the coming weeks we'll get this stuff out. So, yeah, awesome.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys so much. And again, any questions, jump into the fellowship, come join us. We'd love to see you there. And thank you so much for your time, Luke. I'm going to butcher that name. Sorry. And Duncan and Doris and Kyle. And thank you, Julia. Absolutely wonderful.
Nice. Good fireworks to finish the show.
Got to have it.
Okay. See you later, everyone.
I love these AI things. Hey,
how are you doing it?
Hand gestures. If you do like signs, you do thumbs up. I think you can make a heart as well. Hey, look at that. I think it might be a setting that you have to turn on.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. Or do you have, yeah, you'd have Pro Zoom.
Yeah.
You can also push Shift Command R and it stops the recording.
Yeah.
Nice.